American animal shelters are so full of dogs right now because we have a massive overproduction problem.
Overproduction, essentially is having more dogs and cats than people want.
It's a very complicated issue, and I think people don't necessarily have understanding of the consequences of that behavior.
That's when you start seeing them strays out in the community, animals being neglected, abandoned. It all correlates to overpopulation. If we didn't have this problem of overpopulation, we wouldn't be seeing as much neglect, cruelty, abandonment.
My name is Lisa Milet. I'm a professor of law at the University of Georgia, and I focus on animal welfare for my research and teaching. I adopted my first dog when I was 35. I became somewhat aware of the fact that there were larger problems with pet overproduction, and this was in 2005. At that time, I was in practice. I was a tax lawyer in DC, and once I moved to Georgia in 2007, I started going by the shelter here a little bit and taking the dogs out, posting them on a local website called AthensPets.net to get them publicity and find them homes. But it was incredibly depressing. Nothing seemed to be changing, and large numbers of dogs were being euthanized. And so I took 2 years off from volunteering in rescue. And when I came back, I decided I wanted to change things systemically.
Crystal Barber. I work for Athens-Clarke County Unified Government, and I'm the Director of Animal Services. I was hired in 2020. Animal Services became its own department. When you have an overproduction of any item, whether it be an animal or, a bottle of Coca-Cola, then, it has to go somewhere. There's not many places you can take animals. So they end up a lot of times in shelters and unfortunately sometimes being humanely euthanized because of time and space. It's definitely too many and not enough homes for them.
The problem we're seeing is one that is worse in the Southeast, most certainly, and in the South more generally. As the animals down here are overproduced and transported to other parts of the country, we're actually seeing overcrowding in the shelters in the Northeast and the places that typically receive animals. We can't really attack one small part of it without looking at the overall picture. Coming out of the COVID shutdowns, we didn't have that many dogs in shelters. The impound started coming in as soon as people started going back to work. And so within 2 years, we had doubled the number of dogs we had in municipal shelters in Georgia. And at that point, they were pretty well full. But the dogs kept coming, and the reclaims and adoptions and transfers couldn't keep up. So shelters became overcrowded, and their live release rates started to drop. They started euthanizing more dogs, and some shelters began turning animals away. They stopped taking in owner surrenders and even strays.
The effects of pet overproduction can be seen in a variety of ways. When we see juveniles, puppies and kittens, impounded at the shelter, that's one obvious sign. When animals lose their homes, then sit in a shelter for an extended period, that's another. Some community members will take in more homeless animals than they actually want, and they keep the puppies or kittens their pets produce simply because they can't find homes for them. People leave stray dogs and cats in the community to fend for themselves, or those animals arrive at a shelter and aren't reclaimed. And municipal shelters turn away animals or schedule them for admission weeks or months out because there isn't room. In each case, the number of available animals exceeds the community's capacity to happily and humanely care for them.
Before we get to that, why should we care? And I think anyone in this class is going to say, I care because I care about animal welfare. It sounds like it's awful for the dogs, right? Like that's the easy answer. But when I'm talking about, either on the state or local level, if I'm talking about changing laws, I have to assume that the people I'm talking to are not that concerned about animal welfare. A lot of them aren't. A lot of them do have the position that's property. And so part of your job as advocates and as lawyers is to come up with a truthful argument that's going to be persuasive to your audience, whether that audience is a jury, a judge, commissioners, whoever it is. As taxpayers, we spend more than $100 million a year in Georgia dealing with pet overproduction. And that's our budget for our animal services departments, and that's mostly dealing with strays and owner surrenders, dogs and cats that are simply overproduced so that there aren't enough homes for them. It's a public safety issue. Stray animals are animals that become desperate as they look for food, as they look for mates, and they come into negative contact with people. They might get hit by cars, they get into people's trash, and that provokes a confrontation. Then it's actually a public health issue as well. Most of the stray animals that come into animal services are not previously vaccinated for rabies, and so they are potential rabies carriers. It's also, frankly, a real humanitarian problem. The people who work at shelters and volunteer at shelters are paying really high emotional costs for this.
So you get these dogs that are misunderstood because they haven't had training, they haven't been socialized, and then we end up having to euthanize them because we don't have time, we don't have space, or they have behavior issues that aren't fair for us to pass on to another adopted family. Compassion fatigue, it's a real thing in the shelters. People need to realize that their actions directly relate to how shelter workers feel on a daily basis.
Also awful for the people purchasing puppies, for example, that have had no shots and immediately get sick, and the person has the choice between spending thousands of dollars to try and save this puppy or just letting it die. And that's just not a good solution. Like this is really a tragedy all around. As animal welfare professionals, we get asked why we should focus on animals when there is so much human suffering. And the answer is that animal welfare is human welfare. Pets play a really big role in our society, and for many people, their pets are their family members and their most meaningful relationships. Take that relationship away or euthanize the animal, and the person suffers.
If it's a dog that's roaming, then either it's pregnant or it's getting somebody pregnant.
In Athens-Clarke County in 2022, 86% of the stray dogs that came into animal services were not sexually sterilized already. They were not spayed or neutered. In other jurisdictions, it's even higher. I've been told by some animal control officers that close to 100% of the dogs that come in as strays are not spayed or neutered already, which means that they're reproducing, and this becomes an exponential problem.
Without a doubt, pet overproduction is an animal welfare problem. But this isn't just about the animals. It's also a community welfare problem. For taxpayers, for residents encountering homeless animals, for the people who love and care for shelter animals, and for people who unwittingly purchase puppies and kittens that are dying of preventable diseases. If not solved quickly, overproduction is an exponential problem. Female cats in the South can have 4 to 5 litters each year, and a female dog goes into heat twice each year, producing 20 puppies or more, and those puppies can start reproducing at just 6 months of age. Delaying dealing with overproduction means making it worse.
So why are we in this situation?
COVID was a problem in a sort of an odd way. My name is Janet Martin. I'm a veterinarian, spay-neuter surgeon, and I do community outreach as well. COVID ended up encouraging a lot of people to adopt animals because they were at home, they were working from home. It seemed like a great time to get a puppy.
We did have much lower intake, and so people who wanted puppies or wanted a particular breed of puppy or wanted a puppy without interacting in person with someone turned to buying online or just at roadsides, outside venues, and so they got a bunch of puppies.
People went back to work, went back to their offices, and it turned out that this puppy that they acquired 6 months previously was not used to being at home alone, had not been trained at all to be home alone, was not able to self-comfort or settle, and ended up having separation anxiety issues, destructive behaviors, and so those animals in large numbers came back into the shelters.
With COVID-19, a lot of spay-neuter options shut down. Spay-neuter was considered a non-essential service, and so veterinarians weren't performing the surgeries.
And now we have COVID dogs. So now some of those animals that were in homes and not able to get spayed and neutered, of course, so then you're seeing also unwanted litters and not scheduled litters from people that, don't have dogs that are super highly adoptable.
We have a backlog. We simply haven't caught up on the surgeries that didn't happen for 2 years. And in addition, there's a vet shortage. So it's all sort of come together in this perfect storm of meaning that we have more intact animals in our community, so spay-neuter rates are lower. And this means that we're going to have this escalating problem. The primary state breeding law is one that requires any person become licensed as a pet dealer if he is producing and selling more than 1 litter of dogs, cats, or any other pet in a 12-month period of time. It says that you're not going to be considered a pet dealer unless you sell more than 1 litter in any 12-month period. That sounds great, though. But what's wrong with it? I mean, 1 litter sounds like a pretty small exemption. This is an easy question, yeah.
I think it's probably hard to monitor.
Yeah. Monitoring costs are incredibly high. If you think about all the people producing and selling 2 litters a year in Georgia, How are you ever going to keep track of that? You can't. Everybody cheats. Everyone, except the very largest producers, says, this is my first litter of the year. And they can say that because they didn't have to give notice for their first litter of the year that they were using the exemption. And so as a result, this illegal and at times highly problematic breeding flourishes. That's the primary Georgia law that governs breeding in Georgia, and it's just under-enforced as it is. Finally, there's no state laws to combat habitual straying. The dogs that are straying and becoming pregnant or impregnating others, there's nothing saying that if a dog does this enough times, it has to be altered. And many jurisdictions have no animal control ordinances or ones that don't provide for mandatory spay-neuter under any circumstances. As a result, we've got this spiraling problem that's just going to keep getting worse unless we decide to be serious about targeting the animals most apt to be adding to overproduction for spays and neuters. Some shelters have dealt with the inability to get spay-neuter appointments in time by releasing intact animals to adopters. So giving an adopter an unspayed female dog with a contract saying that they have to get her altered within 30 days, but most shelters don't have the capacity to follow up on those contracts. And in addition, as a legal matter, contracts generally don't provide for specific performance. They don't make someone do something, take some action. Instead, they provide monetary damages. And so in the case of Georgia, shelters are required to spay-neuter animals before they adopt them out or adopt them out with one of these contracts. But if an adopter doesn't get the animal altered under the contract, state law just provides for a penalty. A financial penalty doesn't help anything. We want the animals altered, and contracts just don't get that done.
We don't ever send animals out without being altered unless it's a medical case that they can't, or it's a foster that's too young. Otherwise, we do not. But I know some shelters have, and I think it's really because it does free up a space at the end of the day. As far as breeding goes, we have people that are inadvertent breeders. Their dog gets out or gets loose, gets impregnated, and they don't mean to have a litter. Or maybe they think they're doing right by letting their dog have a litter, and then that person ends up not being able to find homes, and they end up coming into the shelter.
Unregulated breeding, mistake breeding, oops breeding is all part of the reason too many puppies and kittens are produced every year for the number of long-term loving homes that are available for them.
One of the things that we can really help them with is education, getting their pets spayed or neutered, making sure they understand the ordinances and why it's so important that they get spayed and neutered, and then also seeing if there's anything else we can assist with. And lots of times, they don't really want to deal with the puppies or kittens. They just don't know that we can maybe get them spayed and neutered before they have their babies. So again, I think education is the way to go with them. The other group is really more of your backyard breeders.
Backyard breeding, if you think back to it, and the inadvertent breeding are both low volume breeding. That's different than the purpose-bred dogs, which are usually purebred or for a distinct, might be sporting purpose or something. And it's different than the puppy mill dogs. And it's actually different than the commercial breeders, where it's a larger activity and people know they live next door to a commercial breeder. Backyard breeding is sort of a buzz phrase in the animal welfare community, but it's not very often defined. And so I think of backyard breeding as the small-scale, illegal or unregulated commercial breeding of dogs that prioritizes profit over welfare.
These people want to make a profit, and generally, they don't keep their animals very well. Those animals are not generally ever vaccinated. They don't ever get any medical attention. They don't get the love and respect they deserve.
I'm Officer Nickelbein. I am the Animal Services Field Supervisor here at Athens-Clarke County Animal Services, and I oversee kind of daily operations of our officers out in the field. Backyard breeders are breeders that are intentionally reproducing animals for the wrong reasons, attempting to gain a profit from it, amongst other things. It's all about the intentions.
Those individuals, generally, you need to use enforcement like citations. Sometimes it even goes to cruelty where they're hoarding. So, that can get really out of hand quickly. So that's why enforcement is generally the way you have to go with those individuals.
Right now, there is so much breeding going on, intentional or otherwise, that it's hard to know where to start. We know that inadvertent breeding, resulting from straying dogs, intact outdoor dogs, or by opposite sex dogs who aren't separated during heat cycles, make the most problematic breeding. The intentional and oftentimes illegal breeding of the dogs filling our shelters virtually invisible. So, reducing overproduction needs to start with reducing inadvertent breeding and exposing problematic breeding. We also have to focus on regulation. For-profit breeders must internalize the cost of their businesses, because that's what breeding and selling is, a business. And yet, they're not required to set aside amounts to care for the animals they produce and aren't able to sell. Instead, these costs are levied on the taxpayers. Effectively, we are subsidizing businesses that profit from the dogs we are killing in our shelters instead of requiring them to pay their own expenses like lawful businesses do. We don't check that breeders collect sales tax or pay income tax. We let them sell in parking lots and other informal venues, meaning they can pick up and move easily and become impossible to find when an animal they sold turns out to be sick. Finally, we need to require some categories of animals to be spayed or neutered. Dangerous dogs, animals straying or engaging in nuisance or dangerous behaviors linked to their intact status, and dogs owned by people who violate breeding laws.
But she's got a lot of medical issues that we're trying to work on. But I want our main number one focus, besides obviously the animals in our care and getting those adopted, is helping with spay and neuter, stopping overproduction. Everything that we try to do, we really try to do with that goal in mind, because the less that are made and produced out there are the less that come in here.
Targeted spay-neuter can be a really effective technique for preventing overcrowding of shelters. It alters the animals that are most apt to be reproducing. That just means there are simply fewer animals in the community to add to overproduction. And a lot of folks have animals that are the only animal in their household and they keep them inside. And so while there may be health reasons for that animal to be altered, they don't necessarily need to be spayed or neutered for reproductive reasons. A widespread program can spend a lot of money and not actually be that much more effective at preventing overcrowding than one that's narrowly targeted on the animals who are likely to be adding to the overproduction. In addition, stray animals are largely straying because they're looking for mates. And so they come into shelters as adults and they spend time there. Even if they get reclaimed, they took up space for a couple of days, and that space that could have been used for an animal that didn't have a home. The targeted spay-neuter gets to the animals who are straying and looking for mates. So when you're reclaiming animals from the shelter, that's what we're talking about for the most part. That helps reduce the shelter overcrowding immediately as well, not just long-term.
We can hit some areas that may have language barriers or may not know what resources are available. Unfortunately, some of those areas are also the areas where we get hit by cars, stray dogs. They have a higher tendency to be pregnant when we get them. So by doing some targeted spay and neuter, we may be able to hit places that normal outreach wouldn't get.
The biggest barriers to expanding spay-neuter programs are twofold, I think. One of them is it's simple money. The second one, and it's related to the cost, is that there is a vet shortage in the U.S. We are producing only a couple more vets each year than retire. But in addition to retiring, vets leave the practice because they have died, because they decided to go part-time, or they were just burned out and they're taking a leave. We've learned to have a higher standard of care for our pets than perhaps when I was growing up. And so people are demanding more of their vets, but there are fewer of them given the number of pets. The price for services goes up and the availability of things like spay-neuter goes down. There are ways to reduce our overproduction without having every animal get spayed and neutered. And while there are medical reasons to have animals spayed and neutered a lot of the time, we do have to be aware that it's a limited resource.
I'm not doing anything to you, baby. All right, so he has now been given his induction, and he'll just start getting wobbly. It's like downtown on a Friday night, right, Rudy?
Even where there's limited spay-neuter capacity, we've worked out a program here where we have a vet going into a private vet office on days that he wasn't using the surgery suite anyway. She goes in and does the surgery. So there's ways to expand capacity, even if you don't have the money to build a whole new spay-neuter clinic or you don't have staffing to staff it full time. For us, we do it 2 days a week, and it's made a huge difference in our capacity.
Preemptively, if we're out in the field, we're talking to somebody, We use an off-site vet clinic, and they have a surgeon there Tuesdays and Fridays. We already know Lisa will give us dates if the surgeon's not going to be in there. So we already have a schedule. We can just schedule them.
One of the important things, I think, is decreasing the barriers to actually getting the animals in. And so we don't use vouchers. We don't have the individual in the community call me to set up an appointment, because that's just going to take back and forth between me and the vet clinic. Instead, our animal control officers are empowered to make the offers in the field, and they collect the information necessary. They give the resident the date for the appointment and a sheet that tells them where to go and when, and then they just send me a copy of the information, and I take care of it with the vet at that point.
So we're usually out there for something else. We know of a dog that is getting let out the front door and uses the restroom and goes back. We go and make contact with the owner. We let them know, there's a couple things that could stem from this and that could be, detrimental for the dog, for the community. And then we ask and learn and obtain more information about the animal, and we find out if it's spayed or neutered. If it's not altered, what the reasoning is for it. If they're trying to breed, if they just feel bad, they don't want to have the animal go through surgery. And that also gives me an opportunity to figure out if they just don't have the knowledge, they can't afford it, they're not able to get to the vet, they have medical conditions or disabilities. And that's where the awesome resource from Athens Pets comes back in. Like, hey, I got this awesome opportunity that I can, right now in front of you, schedule an appointment to get your dog spayed or neutered within the next 2 weeks.
And then here at the office, through the front door, sometimes people come in and just ask, like, oh, do you guys spay and neuter? Because they think we're a spay and neuter clinic. And it's like, we don't, but we have this great program that we can get spayed and neutered.
I think that education has to be part of what we're doing. There are animals that we definitely want to target for spays and neuters, but we can also do a lot towards educating people. The number of times I hear, I didn't know that siblings would reproduce, or I didn't know that a parent and offspring would reproduce, is actually quite high.
It's great to be able to go out in the community, interact with people, kind of hopefully redefine the role of an animal control officer. And we like to be seen as something positive. We care about what's best for the animal and also what's best for the owner or the people involved. We're there because we want to help. Whatever the problem is, we want to help. We want to see progress made. And when we see that, it's very rewarding. And when people start talking to us, they realize that we're not out to criticize what they're doing, make them feel down about, what they're doing. We're there to educate, and we're not here to hand out citations, although of course we will if the situation dictates that.
Because we've been out spearheaded with the PAWS group, people trust animal services a little more. So if they have problems, they come to us before it's a true problem for the animal. So they're getting medical care when they need to. When they get a new pet, they inquire about spay and neuter up front versus letting them get pregnant and then dealing with puppies later. So I think because we've had that relationship with them, I think they really have found that they can trust and reach out to animal services more.
Athens-Clarke County Animal Services partners with UGA Law's Practicum and Animal Welfare Skills to run pop-up community vet care clinics in neighborhoods disproportionately producing socially and physically neglected dogs, which are impounded at the shelter. Approximately 1/4 of the animals have previously been spayed or neutered. Owners of another 1/4 of the animals agree to have them altered because it's free. Another 1/4 agree after building a relationship with the veterinary team and learning about the health and behavioral benefits. In the end, 75% of the animals are altered.
It takes targeted spay and neuter and local ordinances to make an impact on this problem. Some number of those animals who are not getting spayed or neutered under that targeted spay neuter are being used for backyard breeding or other intentional commercial breeding that's not responsible. And those animals, their owners are never going to agree voluntarily to have them spayed or neutered. A lot of times, in order to prevent the issues with them coming into the shelter now and with them overfilling it in the future, it's necessary to have a narrowly focused mandatory spay-neuter provision.
There's 2 mandatory spays and neuter requirements. If their animal's impounded the first time and it's not spayed and neutered, then the county pays for it to be spayed or neutered if they want it the first time. If they get picked up the second time, then it's on them. Doesn't matter why we get your cat or dog. If you're in jail, it got loose, doesn't matter. If it comes in here on the second impound, it's gonna get spayed or neutered. So they get a free one the first time, we pay for that through the county. The second time, it's on them. The other reason that it's mandatory in this county to get spayed and neutered is if they're classified. Sometimes behavior is linked to breeding, so we don't want an already mean dog to breed and produce more mean dogs. And then 2, It does hopefully help curb their behavior and won't make them so aggressive. And then hopefully they're not running around to cause issues, which is most likely how they got here in the first place.
One of the things we do in Athens-Clarke County is that at arraignments for animal control offenses, the county attorney includes free spay-neuter offers as one bargaining point. So if there's a defendant in court who would otherwise have, let's say, a $300 fine, we'll offer $100 off the fine for each animal of theirs they let Athens Pets pay to spay and neuter. So it's no cost to the person, no cost to the county, and the nonprofit picks up the expense. And the benefit to this is that these are people who have already said no to multiple offers. So the people who have said no several times and are now in court are ones that are likely adding to our overproduction problem. Another option is to adopt ordinances that nudge people into spaying and neutering. And what I mean by this is that right now it's cheaper to have an intact dog than an altered one until you end up with medical issues. You can nudge people to spay and neuter, for example, with the free spays and neuters we offer on reclaims. Another one is a licensing program where there's a differential fee for intact and altered animals. So where an animal that's not spayed or neutered might cost $50 a year to license, and an animal that is spayed and neutered and microchipped might be free. And that's not going to force anyone to spay or neuter, and you're not going to have everyone rush on the same day to get it done. Instead, what you're going to see is that the people who are not breeding intentionally for profit are going to opt into spay-neuter, and it once again makes those intentional breeders more obvious in the community. I'm a big proponent of the idea of registering every litter someone has. I don't expect that the illegal breeders are going to run out and get their license, but what it will do is it will make it visible. If the lawful breeders are all displaying their licenses and somebody else doesn't have one, you can see where the illegal breeding is going on. The other thing that sort of registration does is it gives an opportunity for groups who are focused on spay-neuter to make targeted offers.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution for combating pet overproduction. Fixing the situation we're in takes a combination of programs, policy changes, and ordinances. First, pet breeding should be subject to a licensing program, like hunting and fishing. In other words, everyone participating in it should be required to provide basic information about their activity, and there should be a limit on how much breeding anyone can do. To make this enforceable, the registry should be online and publicly searchable. Buyers could quickly confirm their seller is operating legally, and the seller can be held accountable if they make misrepresentations or sell a sick animal. Second, people should be nudged to have their pets spayed and neutered through strategic free spay and neuter offers. Dog licensing with differential rates depending on whether the pet is intact or altered, as well as information about the link between intact status and problematic behavior that often results in owners surrendering their pets. Pet owners must also be informed about common health issues associated with intact status, like mammary, uterine, and prostate cancer, pyometra, prolapses, and severe Demodex outbreaks. Third, local laws should require shelters and rescues to spay and neuter all animals before they are adopted, using foster to adopt if they can't currently alter an animal for health reasons. Ordinances should require that straying or inappropriately confined animals be altered at their owner's expense on the second offense, and free spay-neuter offers should be made on the first offense. Additionally, after illegal breeders are caught, they should be prohibited from owning any intact animals of the type they were illegally breeding. Breeders should be required to internalize the cost of their businesses through minimum vetting requirements, minimum insurance requirements, and a prohibition on sales at transient locations. Finally, jurisdictions need to expand their low-cost spay-neuter capacity by funding spay-neuter clinics, training veterinarians in high-volume surgical techniques, offering surgeries outside the hours of 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday to Thursday, and being creative in identifying new surgical space. We ensure appointments are available when they are most needed.
One of the things I've tried to keep in mind with the programs I've initiated here in Athens-Clarke County is trying to have them be replicable in other jurisdictions. I don't think that there's anything particular to Athens-Clarke County. I started them here and tried them out here because I'm physically here. And so our animal control was the one I was able to spend a lot of time at to talk to the animal control officers, and I set up my nonprofit here. But the truth is, it's something that anyone in any jurisdiction can do. So all of this is trying to think through what are the elements of this overproduction? How can we, in a way that is not overly broad? I mean, we don't want to take away people's rights. And we don't want to say everybody has to spay and neuter, but it's going to be different with the backyard breeding. And then you think about, how do we stop the production? How do we disincentivize all of this? If somebody has an inadvertent litter, I want to help them find good homes for those animals. I'm going to offer them free surgeries along the way, but I want them to be able to find homes. I don't want them to be in the situation where they have 5 large dogs they can't care for. For most of us, what we can deal with is what's in our backyards and what's in our communities. Changing the laws can be slow, and even once they're changed, enforcement often takes a while to ramp up. But programs can be started immediately, and policy changes also take immediate effect. We can always back them up with laws later on, but let's make the change today. Because if we can positively affect the lives today, why wait